According to my watch, at least, I think the Mayans have about 40 days left, right? You know, they always ship late, but seriously, if they're due to get the apocalypse in, then they've got, it's the holiday season in North America soon, and they're going to have to hurry up. And for somebody who specializes in living in the future, who specializes in future trends, this lack of the apocalypse is something of a relief, I guess. It's also something a bit of a disappointment. I was hoping to get out of some essays I need to write. The apocalypse is a good way to get out of deadlines. Everybody really loves a good apocalypse. We're always up for them. We're always looking forward to them. They're actually quite a hopeful thing, apocalypses. You can see this in the way that the apocalypse type plots come in films and in popular culture in regular bursts, that we're actually really looking forward to the end of the world. For many of us, it really is very tempting because it involves an awful lot of reinvention and renewal. We can finally ignore our inbox because, hey, it's the end of the world. And in the tech world, we talk about the apocalypse all the time. We talk about disruption, for example, and creative destruction. Throughout today, I'm sure these have been the tropes that have been coming through all the time. The apocalyptic nature of the internet and of modern technologies as they come through and they destroy things and then rebuild them afresh afterwards. Gives us a clean slate every few years. Moore's Law giving you a clean slate every 12 to 18 months. And there's a constant feeling within the technology world that this new thing, these new things that are coming down the line will save us. Whether that new thing is the next email that you get into your inbox, or the next tweet that references you, or the next bit of technology that's going to come from Apple in January. The new thing will save us, the apocalypse will reset everything. We see this in the sort of quasi-religious idea of the singularity. Those of you who haven't been reading science fiction long enough, the singularity is, you know, in Christianity you have this idea that Jesus will come along one day and the world will end and we'll all be swept up to live in heaven forever in a happy place. Well, the singularity is like that, only Jesus is Siri. Big data is very close to this as well. You hear an awful lot of talk about big data and the idea that once we have this sort of gift from upon high that comes down, it will change the world completely and usher us into a new sort of heavenly idea. And with any of these eschatologies, with any stories of the end of the world, they always come created by one man. You'll have noticed this. It's always the singular hero entrepreneur. And we've seen this throughout the years. The coming of Steve Jobs foreshadowing the coming of Mark Zuckerberg, of himself foreshadowing the next great savior. It's the Northern Californian ideology, really, that the great lone entrepreneur, the technology Jesus, will arrive and will save us by wiping the slate clean of old industries, by creating a technological utopian apocalypse. We've been celebrating this lone hero entrepreneur for a very long time. But of course, when we're talking about cities, and specifically when we're talking about London, as Ben just said, cities are not like this. They're not made of single heroic individuals. Cities are much more than the sum of their individual Randian parts. And when we look forward, really forward to the future that we can't really predict, the future of 2020, 2025 and beyond, we find a whole series of challenges facing the city that this heroic individualism can't possibly face. If the Mayans, it turns out, are wrong, we're going to be facing some really interesting stuff in the next 10 years. The change in demographics, the aging population, climate change, the weather is going to try and kill us. The energy crisis, the economic crisis, every possible social and cultural war that you can think of is going to happen very, very soon. And all of these challenges that we face will take much more than just seeing the city as a block of potential customers. Seeing the city as a place where you can install your startup and sell to mindless individuals. Because that individualist attitude, that great Northern Californian libertarian Randian attitude, is the very thing that is causing these problems in the first place. And that they are themselves hiding these community issues that we have. Indeed, I would say that the heroism that has been put forward, indeed by many of the speakers on this stage today, is hiding the major issue that we face here in London. It isn't rent or the ability to hire coders from somewhere else or lack of bandwidth or something like that. The biggest problem that we face here in London is in fact inequality. We're living through many, many things at the moment. We're living through a massive bubble. Those of you who've never been in a bubble before, this is what it feels like. It's going to get really interesting quite soon. We're living through an economic crisis, and we're living through a massive Gilded Age. Like I say, it's a time of massive inequality. Between here in Canary Wharf and Tech City, in the West, yes, there are many, many exciting business and investment opportunities, or indeed massive opportunities, especially for the finance industry and for landlords. Smaller possible opportunities for technologists, I guess. But between here and there, it's also the most deprived, most economically subdued, most overlooked part of London, if not country. Right next door to here, right next door to Tech City, right next door to all of these places where these startups and great businesses, all of your great businesses are the poorest people in the city. Literally next door. Now why this has happened, is not really the point anymore. It's kind of like arguing about the origins of climate change. It doesn't really matter whether it's anthropogenic or not. It's happening. You know, if you're affluent, if you're rich, you would say that the reason that this is the case is because of economics, because of globalization, because of the unbending rules of finance, that just, this is what happens. And if you're not affluent, if you're not rich, if you're poor, then you would blame politics. But again, it doesn't really matter why this is. Of course, if you're in this room, you might not realize it, but you're not actually part of the super duper rich. In 2005, for example, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, when they had dinner together, they themselves alone, added up, were richer than the bottom 30% of all of North America. You're not particularly well off, actually. But nevertheless, you are much more well off than, say, anybody who lives in Hackney. And this is going to be something of a problem. Now, as Greg said, I do a lot of national security work. I was just in the States, that's why I'm a bit jet-lagged and annoyed. He's grumpy today. And I was doing some work for the Pentagon. And in national security terms, if you're talking about this in national security terms, this is where the threat is. There are some people out there, not half a mile from here, who are very pissed off right now because of this growing inequality, and will be deeply upset by a lot of the things that have been discussed here today, and a lot of the cultural assumptions that have been made on this stage. So from a national security point of view, what I'm talking about is how the poor will rise up and kill us all. Now, of course, if I had my Prime Minister's Ambassador to Tech City hat on, it's a very special hat with a feather. This is the bit where I talk about new markets. It's the bit where I talk about potential customers. Yes, these people don't have very much money, but we can sell them some cool stuff. But as somebody who lives here in London, or at least is based here in London, I think it's always good to finish these sorts of conferences with more questions than you start with. More questions and bigger and wider questions than just, how can I get onto this bandwagon as I see it flying past? In the best possible sense, the best people to talk to you about deep questions are Zen monks, and I quite like hanging out with Zen monks because they don't eat very much and I can eat the rest of their breakfast. And They don't ever touch the bacon, it's marvellous. And if you speak to a Zen monk, they tell you, speak to some of the Zen monks I know, they tell you a very particular story. I think it's a bit of a cliche, but I'm going to go with it anyway. Apologies to any ordained Buddhists in the room who've heard this before. Imagine that you're looking at a flower in the middle of some grassland. What is it that is flowering? Is it the flower that is flowering? You say, well, yes, it's the flower that is flowering, the lone heroic flower that is flowering. But then you say, well, actually, no, the flower can't be flowering because the flower wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the plant. So you say, well, is the plant the thing that's flowering? And you say, well, no, actually, it can't be the plant that's flowering, because if you took the plant out of the soil, then it would die, it wouldn't be able to flower. So is it perhaps the soil around the plant that is flowering? So, well, no, the soil around the plant wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the field around it. Is it the field that is flowering? No, because the field couldn't be there if it wasn't for the farm, and the farm wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the roads, and the roads wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the village, and for the county, and for the country, and for the earth. We are all massively interdependent on everybody else. There isn't a single person in this room who has made their own fortune. It's an unpopular thing to say at these sorts of gatherings, and specifically in the technology community, but it's true. There isn't a single person here who has made themselves. We've all become intensely reliant on the communities around us, whether it's our local communities or our technological communities or the open source community or whatever it is. And in every possible way, those communities keep us alive. And in every possible way, the cities that we live in keep us alive. And if a part of that city that keeps us alive is sick, then we are too. And when we start talking about smart cities, when we start talking about using this sort of data to influence the way that this organism that we live in operates, then we have to also pay attention to everybody else who lives in it as well. The distributional consequences of some of the things you've heard here today, and some of the things you'll read about in Wired and other magazines, some of the things that you'll be excited about in the next few years, will have massive effects on not just you, but everybody who surrounds you, from now and pretty much forever. And so because of that, the question you have to be asking yourself as you leave here today is, what is the culture that you are embedding in the work that you do? What is the culture that you are embedding in the things that you are creating? And what is the culture that is embedded in the building that we're in, and the buildings that are outside today? We need to re-examine all of these things, because it turns out, when you expose the data in the way that Ben was saying, it turns out that we are much more interconnected than we can ever possibly imagine. When the Open Data Institute gets up to full speed and they produce more stuff and it's visualized, we will see this to be ever more true. So part of Wired's mission is to give you the things a year in advance. This is what we're giving you. You live in a city, and you live in a city with everybody else. But as the finest minds of the greatest revolution to hit human society, the information revolution, you are uniquely positioned to take advantage of all these great gifts that you've seen and do something for the city that you live in. We need to abandon this idea of the lone hero and instead come together to make sure that our home is safe and healthy. We saw New Yorkers do it a few weeks ago, post-Hurricane Sandy. We'll see it ourselves, I'm sure, when the first big weather thing hits us too. But let's get ahead of that. If we really want to be innovative, if we really want to be disruptive, if we really want to bring about a nice apocalypse, today is probably the day that you start thinking about what it is you're doing, not just for yourself and from your company, but for the people who live down the street. Otherwise, the future of London won't be particularly pleasant, and I'll have gone, and they'll be trying to kill you. Thank you very much.